Continuing in chapter 19, Ayin Beis, volume 1, page 31. So the first half of this chapter, the Rebbe Rashab is delving into exploring the so-called personality properties of the 10 hidden spheres, which are the root of the Kav, which is that ray of a thin ray, a line, thread of energy that emerges, returns after the Tzimtzum, which in turn is the root of the 10 spheres of Atzilus. And basically, we're talking here that these energies have some form. They're formless form, basically. 10 spheres, but blima, without substance. So the long discussion has been how to identify their identities while still retaining their personality, their transcendent personality. And now, the root of it all is the 10 hidden spheres. And the question is, on the table, what does this mean exactly? They're 10, and they're hidden. Hidden means that they are, as he explained, not just concealed from the eye, they're fundamentally in a different type of state. Qualitatively, they're in a state of they're completely encompassed and mu'urav miyuchad, encompassed and together in a type of amorphous, nebulous state. And he gave really three. He said essentially we really can't understand. It's beyond our comprehension, human comprehension, to really understand how they are spheres, which means that they have an chesed gvura, which are opposites like fire and water. At the same time, they completely all reside side by side and dwell together. Overall, this is beyond our comprehension, though we sense intuitively that they're that way, that they're one there, meaning that they're not distinct entities. But then he goes on to explain three different basic examples and in understanding how this works. So in other words, as much as we can comprehend. As he said at the end of the first one, in the first parentheses, that this is the way we understand opposites. So based on that comprehension of paradoxes, so the first example was in the first parentheses, which was the etzem of something as opposed to his dispastus. When we talk about the essential, let's say, elements of fire and water, so they're in their quintessential state, they're in their purest form, but they're also in their most abstract form, meaning that they haven't yet really developed the personality which one will contradict the other. And that state, they are able to coexist and be side by side. That was the first thing. So there's pastures, when they express themselves, fire and water are at war, will battle each other. But when they're in that purest form, they are like, they're more like archetypes, basically.
Even babies, babies always, won't fight with each other. Later, when they get developed and grow up, they could be the worst enemies. So the purest form, in a way. So
It doesn't mean they're not Tefis Makom in that Madriga, and later they want to take it Seer.
He doesn't use the word Tefis Makom. I wouldn't say they're not Tefis Makom. No, they have not. They're like the seed, as I said. When it's in a seed form, things are in their purest, like concentrated state. They don't have that. The individuality of their unique expression is not there yet, though it's rooted there. It's like in a seed form. That's how I would explain it. It's not because of his bittul or something. It's just it's in early Genesis. It's an early state of things.
I didn't mean pure.
I mean, look, in a way, when God created heaven and earth, so he didn't create. It says right away, he created everything the first day, and then he developed it, right? So you could see all of existence, let's say, in a ball, like a seed, and then he started taking out from the seed pieces. So Bereshit bara Elokim Shemayim v'Haaretz. If you think about Shemayim v'Haaretz, includes everything on heaven and earth, every creature, fire and water included. But in fire and water, when it's in that type of seed type of state, no, God didn't go ahead and create fire and water and so on. They're rooted in different levels, because but in the way they actually develop, I mean, it's not. There are examples of this. There are many examples. Anyway, example number 2. It was in second parentheses with seichel, seichel. that an idea in its original state is abstract. As such, it carries and contains possibilities for opposite explanations. So in the idea, in the original idea, they still reside side by side, they dwell together. Once they're defined by the students and their so-called, the way their minds are shaped, let's say Shammai and Hillel, that's when it takes on different differences, which can be very disagreeable ones. And then finally, which is outside the parentheses, he says, Hamoshel b'zeh yedua, and that's where is the soul. The faculties within the soul. The faculties within the soul are clearly faculties, meaning they will become faculties. And there's a difference between seeing and hearing and chokhmah, bina, and so on. However, in the soul, they don't yet reside in different containers, so therefore they don't yet have a mitzvahs, they haven't yet become defined and shaped, which would mean that they would have very distinct roles and even contradictory ones. Like you see in the human body, for example, he doesn't use this example, but let's say the food pipe and the air pipe. They serve very different roles. When food goes in your mouth, you want it to go down the food pipe, not the air pipe, God forbid. But the way these faculties in the soul are in a hiyuli, or in the way he says, in a more refined zakus, more refined, ethereal, spiritual state. As such, they can't even compare it at all to where the faculties later will manifest in particular organs and limbs and containers. And each one has, therefore, its particular space. And he says, and then we ended up here was that, and this is why by Mattan Torah, there are times when you have a gili, a revelation from higher than the order of the structure of existence. Remember the structure, Chachma, Bina is Bina, Riya, Shmiya, sight, sound, everything has its place. But there are times in history where there's a revelation from a higher place that's beyond structure. What that means in the nefesh is that you have the gili of etzem ha-nefesh. In other words, generally speaking, the soul gives us life every moment, but the soul remains as a life force, and the faculties are each one functioning in their own way. But let's say for a moment, there was a moment where there was a gili, a revelation from a higher place, and it also awakened in your soul more of the essence of the soul. So that's when it's possible that suddenly these two faculties will reverse their roles. In a way, it's like a chlifa d'chtayim. It's almost like that gili when the students go back to the teacher, and suddenly, so then you can see the sounds and hear the sights. That's the summary of this. I mean, look, everything can always require more explanation, but when you have something to grasp, but basically the point, after anything is said and done, Rabbi Rashab is helping us sublimate, assimilate to another way of thinking, meaning to think in terms of how things are in their root, as opposed to how they are in their expression. And their root, things that are opposites, suddenly are able to reside side by side. And he says clearly, it's not a scholars. It's not because, we're not talking about bittul, and because like he'll speak later about they're both brought to the kavon el yenis or chesed and vur, no, they have to work with each other. It's a different story. That's another discussion. That actually is once they're in containers and they can contradict each other, because of their bittul, they'll still work with each other. Here he's talking simply on a natural, in their natural progression. There's just a natural way of how things evolve. The way God created the world, in other words. I think this may be helpful. How God created the world, he could have created that boop, a child is born. No, it's not a seed that grows into a fetus, and develops into a child and then to an adult. But you pop out 20 years old, like Adam Achab. Yeah. Or nature. He could have said a chicken. Suddenly a chicken pops out. It's not an egg that becomes this. A seed, right away, is a tree. Well, there's no process. The fact is, the world is created, interestingly, in a metamorphosis way. Everything grows to something else.
But it says Mashiach will come, it will be that way.
But still,
that you can see that he will be.
Yeah, right. It says what's the Yel? Right, exactly.
And the trees and all of that. It says
that's why, because but what's that? But why did he create it this way? There's many reasons.
You won't need that process.
There's a process shows you that this is the way you want the structure of existence, just like the interface. We don't just climb. You don't just suddenly say, you know what, I want to connect to the divine. I'm connected. No, it's a slow process, climbing the ladder step by step, assimilating the ideas, absorbing them. The containers expand. And even the biggest tzaddik go through stages. Even though in early stages you could say you really can see where he's going, but it's still a process of growth and education. Because what you're doing is you're training a material world that on its own does not have revelation, does not connect. You're training it to connect. So you could say all of nature is very much conducive to that. Everything is a process of growth, a process of absorbing and developing. So as such, when we talk about the interface, you want to be able to know how you climb these steps from a more tangible way. We, for example, the world is full of war and dissent and divisiveness. We don't see how we're all parts of one big picture, or else there wouldn't be any battles. So in a very simple sense, if you wanted to apply this to us, you'd say, look, let's say you bring together a group of people who are fighting with each other. And say, we all understand you're Aish, you're Mayim, everybody's got their opinion, very strong opinions. But we all come from the same source. And we all have a role. We even have a role, our diversity has a role. Huh? Right. Right. We all have a role, and our diversity has a role. That's why we have a beautiful universe. But for us to get there, we cannot stay stuck on the expression level, Eishamayim. We have to understand we're rooted somewhere. We all came from the same seed, so to speak. Like he says, Av Echad L'Kolana in Perek Lamed Beis in Tanya, Kulam Asimes, we all rooted somewhere. Yes, now the branches have branched out. But you're living your life on the branch level, or you want to reconnect to the source level, the root level. This is true with brothers and sisters, physically. This is true with human beings in general. So, in a way, if you really take this to avoid, meaning to action, it's not just a nice theory. It's about understanding that we are in a place, and this doesn't mean that we're not Eishamayim there. I'm not talking about obliterating yourself. There's no. It's just in a much more subtle and refined state where it has not yet been expressed. Now, obviously, the kavanah, the purpose that God wants, He doesn't want us to live on the level of the source, or else He wouldn't create a world. Then you're back to, He doesn't want a seed. He wants the branches. He wants it to come in an expressed level, his pashtus, where there is a possibility for war and chaos. But He wants us to be wise and reconnect. So really, this is a way of, at least cognitively, of trying to understand how do we connect to a place where all those entities were, in their original place, they were all side by side, they were once one. And they resided together. We're not even talking about one in the source. We're talking about in the state where they still were Eishamayim, but they're not yet in that full-blown way, the tangible, where they can contradict each other. So that's what he's been doing and what he's explaining, and it has real application if you really think about it. Obviously, the Hamshach later will talk about all the different dysfunctionalities between Eir and Keli, etc., and how they reconnect. So let's continue on page Lamed Aleph. Top of page 31. And now starts another parenthesis. This one is a pretty long one, right? Almost to the bottom of the page. So again, we established that there's three ways he explained. We're talking about Ostensibly, and we just finished saying about that when there's a revelation from the essence, or from higher than, say there's not higher than the structure or the order, there can be a reversal, there can be what's it called, what I called it?
Substitution?
No, wire, cross wire. Wires get crossed. And that, yeah. Again, it's interesting, he's not saying this because they're all rooted in Hashem Echad, and therefore they're really one fundamentally. He's not even going that far. He's saying even in this Essence Sefirot he's not talking about Eir Ein Sof before that. That's a whole other story, which is discussed elsewhere. That because they're all rooted in Hashem Echad, so they all have a commonality. He didn't say that. He says he's not talking about Iskalus now, commonality. He's talking about just their state is not aggressive yet. They're not yet in a type of tangible, contradictory state. They're in an amorphous, nebulous state, like the seed, or the different ways, or like this abstract thought, or the nefesh, or the essential element. And that's why they have that existence. And when there's a revelation, they can exchange roles or reverse roles. Now in the parentheses. Seemingly, ostensibly, this what he just said, that the Shemin Sanir, that you can see the sound and hear the sight, is seemingly more than the unity and the mixture, the concoction. I don't want to say concoction. Hisarvus, the combination, the combo, a mixture that we talked about earlier. What did we talk about earlier? We talked about Hisarvus, we talked about it in the element, we talked about it in the seichel, and we talked about it in the nefesh. So there, remember, there was before Mattan Torah. That's before there's a revelation. He's saying in the state of an abstract idea, or in the state of the essential element state. You say ha'esh, you say the esh, you say hamayim. The state of the abstract idea, the state of the nefesh, there's a certain hardus. Now, we just said more than that. And when there's a revelation from that place, there's an actually reverse. So he's saying this is more than just the regular hardus. Let's see what he's going. There, we said that they were together. Here, we're actually saying that sight is suddenly experiencing sound, and sound is experiencing sight. That's not just that they reside side by side and don't extinguish each other.
Close it.
Did you close the door? No, open this own. The le'el nizbar. Earlier, it was explained. Above, it was explained. The Ayin Hisarvus, that the idea of their combining, their combo, Hurak mashasheichlim yachad, that they dwell, they reside together. Like, it's like two not enemies, but two opposites residing in one area, in one place.
Toleration.
Huh?
Tolerate.
It doesn't say tolerate
Yeah.
because it's not even there. It's not even, they don't need to tolerate. They don't even have such substance. The einam nikodim zem ezem pnei she'ein behem tzir. That's the key thing. And they're not distinguishable one from another because they don't have a tzir yet. They're abstract. As I said, just you have to think not gashmizik. You have to think like the machshava of Shmai Vavtali, the idea. It's abstract, so it doesn't yet have a tzir. Chesed, gvura, is it osir, potter? The truth is, if you think about it, when you learn Gemara or you learn any process before you paskin, or a Rav is trying to establish what is the halach in a certain area, complex matter. And there's a stage where he's just gathering information. He's learning the idea. He's learning the concepts. And guaranteed, while he's learning it, he probably has a leaning, this seems to be going like this. And then you ever see these shuvas when the Achreinim write a shuva? You never know in the beginning where they're going. They start saying, from this Gemara, you could say like this. Then there's another Gemara that says like that. Then there's a tshuva that says like that. And then at the end, sometimes even a surprise conclusion. Because sometimes they find one thing that reconciles or they find one thing that dominates. My point is that they're discussing an idea. At that state of the idea, it has many kavim, so to speak. It can go this way, it can go that way. Just using an example that every process, so there's no, when one doesn't have it seared yet, meaning because the idea is still, it's a concept now. This concept, yeah. I don't know if my example is exact because here it's even more. Here it's saying that the concept is really contains in it the possibility to go like this, possibility like that. Not that one svara leans like this, one svara. I'm just giving an example, however. So bottom line is that when we spoke before Isarabas, what we meant was that they reside together because they're not yet distinguishable because they don't yet have tzir. They don't have shape. Another example is they say that when a child is conceived, initially today, all children are female. Until the first few seconds or first few minutes, when a chromosome is shifted, and then it becomes a male. So you can see from that alone, that life itself can be very amorphous. And it's just a matter of things that change a little later, or very early stages. But each one is the way it is. It doesn't say they change their personalities. They're just without yet shape and form. They don't have yet tangible definition. Therefore, they reside. But each one is what it is. The etzem husay is what it is in its purest essential form. The Khan, now, when we spoke about what happened by Mattan Torah, that you heard the sounds and so on, and saw the sights, heard the sight and saw the sound, Harikei Chadiyah, Paul Pula Haftu is the Keich Hashmiyah. How does he read that? Paul Pula Haftu. Oh, the Keich of Keich. That Keich Hariyah suddenly is doing something that the Koyach Hashmiya always did. The Koyach Hariyah is suddenly hearing something, which is really the role of Koyach Hashmiya. So it's more than just residing side by side, and like in the body, sight is in the eyes, hearing is in the ears. Fine, no problem. They have two different functions, two different places, etc. You close your eyes, you still can hear. Close your ears, you still can see. In the nefesh, Riyah Shmiya reside, not Riyah Shmiya literally, the faculty in a abstract form, so they're together. But Riyah does not become Shmiya, and Shmiya doesn't become Riyah. These are, there's expressions, maybe another example that may be helpful. When Yosef brought Menashe and Ephraim to be blessed by Yaakov, so it says Yaakov reversed his hands. He put Menashe on the right and Ephraim on the left, because Menashe was older. So he was going to bless Ephraim with his right hand. So what did Yaakov did? He crossed his hands. So the question Chassidus asks, why? But since he's benching them, why couldn't he give Menashe the bracha, but a b'char should get, the older one should get? So Chassidus answers, because it's a bracha, not a tefillah. When it comes to a blessing, you can only bless what the person has in their source. The blessing it gets rid of impediments and reveals quicker or easier that which is destined for you. So Yaakov saw Menashe would get this and Ephraim would get that. So it's not a matter of his wanting to give it to Menashe. Can't. That's the source. Like the wire of Menashe goes here and the wire here goes here. What he's only able to do with the bracha is bring it down from the sheish down here. Tefillah, Chassidus says, has the power of Yehi Ratzon. You actually can change destiny. Yehi Ratzon, Ratzon Chodesh. Even though, God forbid, let's say a person is in a hospital, you don't say, oh, God destined that they should be sick. You pray that even if the destiny is different, we want to feel it, change it. Change it, change your Ratzon, change your plan. Now, of course, another question, each one has a mile over the other. Tefillah has the mile that it can actually change and bring from another place, but it's not guaranteed as much, because you really have to change something, and God could say no. The bracha has the chson, you can't really change, but it is destined. So it's like pretty much guaranteed if you're able to draw it down and be a keli for it, etc., etc. It says Birchas Kainim, Chassidus says, has a mile of bracha and tefillah. Can do both. But that's another story. My point that I'm trying to say here is that I'm just giving you another example. That it does, you can't Riyah and Shmiya, in the source, they reside, but they're still Riyah and Shmiya. It's not. You can't suddenly say Riyah becomes Shmiya, Shmiya becomes Riyah. So it's not a question really. It's just making the point. For the chayv, it's more. Maybe he probably will explain it, but I'm just, which is, it just also from my point of view of methodology of the Rebbe Rashab, you see how, the chayv, he could have not gone to this and left out for us to figure that out. But he wants to spell it out. Obviously, it's going to help our Havana here understand. Yesh lemer, you can say, Shizel Gamkin Rak Pshitzis Atzir v'Hagbola. He's going to be saying, you could say, no, that why they exchange roles is because is not really fundamentally different than what he said earlier. It's because they're Pshitzis Atzir v'Hagbola. It's not just that they don't have shape, because they are shapeless and formless and lack define, that's why they can reverse roles. He's going to explain. We're not just talking some type of it became crazy. It's still in the structure. You're still talking about that seeing sounds and hearing sights. Not necessarily seeing something, completely fantastic you can't relate to. I mentioned synesthesia. It's an existing phenomenon, and you can even imagine it. We may not relate to it, but you can imagine. Riyah and Shmiya, okay, fine. Riyah and Shmiya don't always. Riyah and Shmiya have their roles, but sometimes they could be a reversal.
What is synesthesia?
Where you see sounds and you hear sights.
I mean, it's a real thing?
Yeah, you could actually. Yeah, there are people who actually, when they hear a sound, they see a color, and when they see a color, they hear a sound. It's just the waves.
It's considered a condition?
It's a condition.
Undesirable condition?
Not necessarily undesirable. It doesn't have any consequences. I mean, it doesn't mean when they see you, they don't see you exist. It means, and I don't know if it's in all cases. I've never spoken to someone who has synesthesia, but it's documented. It's not seen as a matter of fact, artists, it's very good for artists because you see, look, when you paint or you play music, you're doing more than just creating a sound or an image. You're creating a vibe, a mood.
Mhm.
So a person who's able to do that can probably convey something in a deeper way because they give you, there's a feeling behind it. Look, we all have a feeling when you see something beautiful, you hear music. It's not just a sound in your ear. The best proof is that you hear an irritating sound that disturbs you. A musical sound that's harmonious does something to you that's more than just physical sound. It's a beautiful sound creates peace, creates a certain sense of tranquility. It can transport you to another time and place. I'm saying all of us realize that sounds and sights are more than just a sound and a sight. Some things you look at mean nothing to you. Sometimes you look at something and it can change your whole life. I mean, just to that. So take it a step further. For some people, go even deeper. They actually see a sight. It has a sound element to that. Now, I'm not saying this is synesthesia per se, but it's very similar to it. Mattan Torah clearly was miraculous, but everybody experienced a type of synesthesia from him. The real question is why? What happened to Mattan Torah? Why was it necessary for this miracle to happen? Besides the fact that it's a manifest, but there's a reason. Because they experienced Mattan Torah in a very, very real way. It was such a sensory experience that every sense was stimulated. The more than stimulated, you actually experience sound and sight and so on. But that's another discussion. Anyway, he's saying, so about Makom Mokom HaYikariya V'Shmiya. And it originates not like from Koyach HaChochma or Bina. In other words, what happened when they heard the sound, when they heard the sight, or saw the sound, it doesn't say they heard Chochmah, and Chochmah heard Chesed, and Chesed experienced Gvura, and Gvura experienced Malchus. In other words, it's not some type of free-for-all. It's coming from their essential quality, Keiches Atzmi, from the essential faculty, as it is at the source of the soul, which is the Keiach, the power of sight and the power of sound. Bottom line, what he's saying here is that it's true that this is more than what we said earlier, but it's not a completely new thing. Basically, what he's saying is like this, so far. See where it goes. He's saying like this, that till now we spoke that they reside and dwell side by side. Now he's adding, because they're pshittas, because they don't have shape and form, not only they reside side by side, they're able to assume each other's personality. And he's saying it's not really completely new. It's based on an extension of the idea that it's pshittas. Because you see, it's not some type of new wild scenario. It's just that when you travel back to the source, in a way you could say, it's like if you can go back from a tree to the seed, and you're able to manipulate the seed, you can make a branch be a leaf, so to speak. I'm not saying you could. You can manipulate it in a laboratory that way. Again, this is just, I'm giving you a little crazy idea. I'm not saying it's possible. This is part of the whole genetic engineering controversy. People can go into the seed and actually add, a seed is conceived by, an egg is fertilized by a seed, human beings or animals, and let's say you inject it with extra protein. And suddenly you can actually change something. You can't do this later. So in other words, you could say, because it's such a gentle, what's the word for not gentle? It's a tender,
Primordial?
like primordial, in a sense, a state where things have not yet developed. It's similar also, sometime I remember once I saw a child fall down the steps, the metal steps in 7-7. And he stood up like nothing happened. If anyone else, an adult, would fall down, they'd break all their bones. There's a certain pliability, malleability. Like, children, for example, if God forbid something happens, much easier to replace something because it's still soft and tender. You can manipulate it more. Just an example. So in other words, so that's what he's saying here. That because it's more poshut, that's why they exchange roles. In other words, they're also they're not just residing side by side. They're closer they're closer in personality because they don't yet have their shape and form. Anyway, let's just continue here. Now he's going to explain there, but the fact is they're opposites. They're not just two faculties. Like Eish and Mayim, he said, are opposites. So you could say, 1 second. It's not so simple. How could Ziyah suddenly do what Shmiya? Ziyah is tefes davar gashmi. For example, you see a physical thing. You can't hear a physical thing. You hear a sound. A sound is already more ethereal. It says in other places in Chassidus that shmiya, that riyah, that's why without ened nasadayim, which means a witness can't become a judge, because when you see it, you can't ever be objective again. Because there's a certain samtus, a certain truth. I saw it and that's it, even if you don't understand it. Shmiya, because you heard it, you didn't actually see the experience, you heard about it, or you heard a sound, you could always say, well, maybe I heard something else, maybe it was like this. Now, seeing also, you could sometimes see something and not, this can be an illusion. But sight has that effect on you because it's such a tangible thing, has effect. Interestingly, Chassidus also says the opposite, that riyah is not as primistic. You see something, like you see a whole painting, you can see the image, but shmiya, you build a case. Like if you want to understand something, you need to, step by step. If you saw a sight, you can take it in and be very, very affected by it, but you may not understand what you just saw. In shmiya, there's no way that it enters you if you don't have some comprehension. So there's a primistic element to it. That's why it's a contradiction. That's why it says, God forbid, someone causes someone to be deaf. You have to pay like as if you kill them. It's the whole life to make kula. And summa is only to make whatever, only for because hearing is more, for that reason, is more value than sight does. Everyone should be blessed to have everything, but the point being is just to understand each one's role.
Right.
So one second, let me just finish this line. So tefes davar gashmi shmi tefes davar ruchni has it seer behem. And so therefore, and the fact that riyah grasps a physical thing and sound, the spiritual or the more ethereal side, that's their tzir. That's already how they express it. But when the keiches are in their state of pshittis, formlessness, in their atzmin, it's called keiches atzmin, meaning how they stand inside, the faculties are inside the soul, where they have no defined state yet. There you could see the sound. What do you want to say?
You're not forgetting.
Okay. So that's l'cheira. He's developing. Nevertheless, it's difficult to say this.
About Riyah and Shriya. Riyah, you see the etzem. So isn't that deeper?
It's not really relevant here. Each one has something. Riyah, you see that, but you may not relate to that.
We'll talk about it because thank you.
It's not comprehension. It's not primistic.
It affects the person on a deeper level.
You can stand in awe. Yeah. Nevertheless, it's difficult to say. Let's say to say this. You can't just say that distinctions between them is only on their expressive level, but not in their essential level. Why? Because what distinguishes them in their fundamental, their fundamental personality, that sight grasps the essence, the inner personality and etzem and the essence of the thing. And sound grasps only the expression, the outer layer of the
Surface.
The surface.
Superficial values.
What?
Superficial qualities.
I will not say superficial, because superficial has a different translation. Metzius mahus. Metzius would be the outer layer, what you see.
This is the core.
Metzius is the object itself, and mahus is what is it really the inner dimension. And this is the reason. It's not some incidental element that when Shmiya happens to this. Because they fundamentally are different faculties. Riyah has the power to touch the etzem. That's why when these faculties come into containers of their containers, Riyah tefeses davar gashmi, sight can see and grasp a physical thing, dafka, specifically v'shmiya davar ruchni. And shmiya grasps the davar ruchni, meaning more ethereal. Let's make it clear. Ruchni here is not as opposed to gashmi, that Riyah is Megushim and Shmi is Edela. A sound is fundamentally more Ruchnis than Gashmi. In a way, Riyah is connected more like to touch. You touch a physical thing. You can't touch a sound. That makes it more Ruchni. Riya can see something that you can touch. Shmiya cannot. That's what he means by Dover Ruchni. I just want to clarify. He's not speaking it in a mile, he's speaking as a chsar, as a weak point. That's according to their essential personality. That sight grasps the mahus of something. The essence, mahus, we said, mahu, what is it? Al-kain tefes dova gashmi. He's explaining. It's not, before what he said was that, Riya and Shmiya, because they're pshittas, because they're formless in their root state, they can, it goes one step further. Not only can they reside near each other, they can replace each other for time being. And the fact that one grasps gashmis, physical, one grasps ethereal, is so-called something that happens later, like fire and water. Once it's expressed, this one burns, and this one's cold, this one's hot. He says no, it's the other way around. Is because they're fundamentally, in their root, different. Riya is connected to etzem. In other words, it's not just that distinction happens as they extend outwards, it's opposite. The root of Riya touches an etzem. This is going to discuss a lot later if you remember Metzach, when you see the face as opposed to sound. It's very similar, a similarity to this. So therefore, that's why Al-Kain Tefes Dover Gashmi Liyashu Sebzeo Tfisus Hamahus. That's why you grasp the Dover Gashmi, because through that you're grabbing the mahus of something. It would be like when you actually embrace the king as opposed to listen to his order. So in a way, listening has a mila, but embracing, you're actually grasping his mahus, whatever the essence of who he is. It says in Tanya, like a mitzvah. Torah is more God's wisdom. A mitzvah, you grasp the etzem itself because you're doing the ratzon itself, the ratzon ayin. Shmiya tefes davar ruchni shuin hametzias. And shmiya, because it grasps more the ethereal, because it is only the metzias. So it only grasps, the ethereal, because shmiya connects only to the metzias of something. So in other words, if you were speaking in the root of everything, before it gets into sight and sound, everything has a mahus and metzias. Mahus is the inner dimension, metzias is its outer dimension, how you see it's expressed. Riya and Shmiya are two forces. One is rooted in the mahus. That's why it's Riya. That's why you see Gashmias. You actually see the physical thing. Shmiya is rooted and connected to the metzias of something. I'm sorry, to metzias, and therefore you see only the ruchni. You don't see the real. You don't relate to the inner essence of it. You don't connect to the inner essence. Not relate, connect. This is what he's now qualifying. So we see from this that their distinction, that this grasp, Kashmir, and this Ruchni is not just something that happens on the container level. It's in their root level, in their source, they're two different things. So we're back to the L'chayra then. In other words, the Yeshlema that he said is not adequate. Not adequate to just dismiss it, so to speak, as being just another dimension of Pshittus and formlessness. No, in their root they're different. And by Mattan Torah, when they saw the sounds, Riya, suddenly, this Riya, which Be'etzim has nothing to do with Metzias, it's to do with Ruchni and Primius. I'm sorry, not Ruchni, with Muhus and Gashmi, suddenly is Tafas as Metzias, Ushmi Tafas Muhus Adavar. And suddenly sound, which never relates to the Muhus, the essence of something, suddenly grasps the essence of it. In the parentheses, the Kipshute Shiros Akelos had Zerak Batzir. Literally, they saw the sounds, it means only that Tzir. In other words, what he's saying is like this. Actually, the difference between these two ways he's explaining is one Kipshute. Kipshute, when you talk about Pshat, where it says in Chumash Reinis Anishma, it says, Rashi touches the Mechilta. But the Pshat level, it means, what did they see exactly? They saw sound. Okay, it's hard to imagine. Usually you hear sound, but they saw something.
Sound waves, they have to understand it.
Okay, well, yeah, when the Kel Shefer, let's say, or a Nechi, whatever. The Kel, there was a Kel Shefer, so usually you just hear a sound Shefer. They saw something. They saw sound waves, it had an image, whatever it may be. So Kel has a Regbet. So Pshute, you can just say it's only the Tzir. We're not talking about Etzem HaNefesh, experience something differently. He's just qualifying what he's saying here. So in other words, it is even though Pshat, you could say that, but Lefi Hanal, according to what we discussed earlier, something also happened in Mahusa Kechis. They didn't just see a sound wave. The Koyach Hashmiya, in the soul, the essence of the soul, experienced suddenly Mahusa of something. So it's a lot deeper. In other words, according to Kipshute, you could still say that this idea is similar to what we spoke earlier, a little taken a step further. But the truth is, no, something fundamentally happened on a deeper level. And that's, of course, makes it much different than what we're saying. It's not just the Sardus and Sarvas, that two things dwell side by side, they actually change personalities. When you say Eish and Mayim reside one another, it doesn't say Eish becomes Mayim and Mayim becomes Eish. So, in the Etzem Hiyuli. The Imkain Harazeh is Chalfus HaKechis. And if that's in the Imkain, if that's the case, it's actually a reversal of faculties.
Couldn't you use substitution here?
No, reversal is Chalfus. Chalfus can be reversal, it can be exchange, it can be substitution. Yeah, these are all legitimate words. Yeah. So now he's already on the subject, he's going further. According to this, not understood, what's the advantage? What do we gain by this? What was gained? If Riya is always the Mohus, what's so great about seeing something Metzias? If you see the essence of something, what will help to see the external outer side? If you think about it, this right here is also talking interface. In other words, because you need both. I'm not saying what he's going to answer, but basically you right away see here that so the question is what was gained from this? I don't know what the conclusion will be. We'll see in a moment. But the bottom line is the flow here is that since now we're machadish, that it's not just a reversal that happened on an external level, but it's also fundamentally that suddenly Riya is seeing Mitzias. So what exactly is the advantage of that? What's the virtue? Now elsewhere it's explained. Inyan Reis Anishma, the idea of seeing the sounds, the Bechinas Haruchnis Hamahavas Hayeshu Etzleinu Berochik, that the spirituality that brings into being the Yesh, the ego, the being of existence, the itness of existence, which for us is distant. What's distant? The Ruchnis. We see the Gashmis, we don't see the force that's giving it life. I'm sorry. That we usually relate to the ruchnis that create something, the life force within, from distance. In other words, for us, it's a form of shmiyah. We heard about it. I heard the story that God created the world and that God, the divine energy, gives it life, but I can't relate to it. So it's all rak b'b'chin shmiyah v'asogim erochik. By Mattan Torah was the chiddush. That was what the chiddush. Elsewhere he explains that the spirituality, the spiritual divine force, energy, that brings existence into being, which for us is usually distant, meaning it's only like a voice, like a sound, and like a distant comprehension, like understanding something but not relating to it physically. By Mattan Torah, it became Riya Mekarev. In other words, they suddenly saw there's this inner force. That says elsewhere. No, I'm sorry, I skipped a line. And since that was revealed, therefore they saw the sound. Which means, they heard the sound. They heard the sound. The sight. They heard that. I'm getting reversed myself, my case. They heard the sight. And the other way around as well. So Re'inus Hanishma means that they heard that which they saw, that which they usually only hear. They saw.
It's a metaphor, meaning that they experienced it in a closer way.
Yeah. They saw only what you usually hear, which means that which you hear from a distance. So they saw the Koyach Mahava. And Mamela, they heard what they see, meaning that the Yesh Gashmi was for them. Now that was the distant thing, because now the Yesh becomes completely sublimated when the Ruchnis is revealed.
Experienced it in a more intimate level.
that which you usually relate to
on a more intimate, personal level, they became more distant to them. The whole thing
that means that they saw the essential divine ayin, which is usually nothingness, meaning invisible, incomprehensible. They saw it as that being the truth. And the physical was for them only in a form of hearing, like hearing about it, because in truth it's not a true existence. It's like what Rabbi once said to the Eibishter. What's the kunst? What's the trick? You give the Jews Elam Haza and all its temptations. That's their reality. And you told them in a book to read about spiritual worlds. You expect them to be disciplined. Why don't you do the opposite? Give them ruchnius, let them experience that tangibly, and let them read in a book about Gashmis. In other words, what we were saying, what is to us obvious is the physical world. We have to be taught. We have to meditate, contemplate. Okay, that behind this is divine providence, and there's a koyach eliki and mahav. That's the usual experience. By Mattan Torah, there was a revelation. Suddenly, everything changed. That which we related to from a distance, which is the Ayin Eliki, the divine force, which was Shmiya. In other words, we usually relate to Shmiya. Now they saw it. That which was always heard.
What do you mean saw it? They experienced it at a very intimate, close level.
So they saw that which usually you hear only about, which is that ayin. It's like seeing something that you've always been concealed. And what did they hear? What they usually experience close in Gashmis now became more bottle, and they saw that it's not really true.
It's not in the function of the cause.
So that's royinus anishma.
It's not the function of the cause.
Sorry, that's sheminus anira, royinus anishma, to see what is usually distant, and what is and to hear distant what is usually close. Okay. The interesting thing is sheminus anira. Nira now is what usually you see as gashmius. Now you see, it becomes distant. It's only ruchnius. It's only shmiyah.
The way we always perceive ruchnius.
Yeah.
Gashmius. Okay.
The imkain, according to this explanation, which is explanation elsewhere, according to this there's no exchange. There's no reversal or what you call it, substitution of faculties. It's just that the
external, the chafetz was changed.
It's the experience that changed.
Yeah. It's their experience.
The subject matter changed.
No, their experience, their relationship.
Seemingly, this is what it says in Tanya. Sefer Shabbein. He does call Sefer Shabbein Hidden Beis. Sefer Shabbein is usually the first chelik in Tanya. Okay, so it's a name for the whole Tanya. It does say this elsewhere. Chelik Beis is Shayachid V'Amona. It's interesting why we would call it Sefer Shabbein Hidden Beis and not Shayachid V'Amona. Yeah. What does it say there? Should we, had we not been ilmole nitna reshus,
Had we given permission to see.
had we been given permission for the eye to see, had the eye been given permission to see, nothing could exist. Meaning, in other words, that the Gashmis, which is usually close to us, in a form of Nira, is now in a form of Shmiya, distant. Like it says elsewhere in their interpretation, it says, who's Ezo Chacham Hareyas Hanelit? Who's the wise person? The one that sees the birthing. Usually means the one that sees the results. Doesn't just look at the cause, you can see the impact, the consequences of something. Sees what's coming. Not it's a Chacham, we're not talking about a Navi. We're talking about he's able to see the outcome of things. So the type elsewhere is Hareyas Hanel, meaning that you see the birthing of Ma'ayin Liyash. You actually can see, in other words, that Ayin Aliki, that gives life to something, which we don't, that's what, not a Chacham doesn't see that. Hanel meaning literally, the birthing of existence. But according to this, it's in the level, the essence, it's in the soul, in its etzem, its essential power, faculty of seeing and hearing within it, before it manifests in the body, and enkan gamisarvas akeches. And you don't have here any type of mixture of the faculties.
Voice is helpless, nice, it's arvas.
Yeah. So in other words, it's a whole different subject, basically, he's saying. It's not connected to what we're discussing here. It's a whole, according to this interpretation, it's a whole different thing. We're not talking about whether, yeah, okay. However, you can say, according to the Baba, you could say that the meaning in seeing the sound is the Chiddush's part is in the Keich HaShmiya. Because Riyah, he's going now back. The real Chiddush is in the power of hearing. Because Riyah, like he said, if you see the Mahus, what's the advantage of seeing the Metzius? So the explanation that the first in Mokamachid explanation is, that's not the point. The point is that you're seeing the Ruchnius. And Gashmis is now distant to you. That's first interpretation here. But now he's going back, that the real Chiddush, back to the question of what's advantage. The real advantage is in the power of hearing, not in the power of seeing. Because hearing is going to experience something you never experienced before. The Keich HaShmiya, which is usually you just have Metzius. Here, by them, by Mattan Torah, by the Hidden, it was like Keich HaRiyah, that they appreciated the Muhus, they comprehended the Muhus, the essence. In other words, it had both miles. Not just seeing alone. When seeing doesn't mean you comprehend it. Seeing means you grasp the essence. Here they had both. Shmiya gives you hasaga, gives you understanding. And here they had hasagas muhus, not mitzvahs. In other words, I didn't mention it really, I alluded to it earlier. Riyah grasps the essence, but you don't necessarily have comprehension of it. Shmiya is comprehension, but it's only of the outer. By when Shema and Sanira, what happens is you have both. Hasagas and muhus, not just hasagas and mitzvahs.
And you have the comprehension?
Yeah.
And the comprehension.
That's what he's saying.
And the one I didn't hear.
Like Lasid Lavi, like in the future, the Yevin Kol Yitzur Kiyati Yitzate. That every creature, every shaped form, every form will know that you formed it, that you shaped it. She's borrowed the comment, sorry. And look and delve into what he says later, discuss later, chapter, they say the bottom is 227. But Sorach Lema, the Mattan Torah Gilim B'chinas Atzmus and Shem Shalom Nesses for the You have to say that Mattan Torah was the revelation from Atzmus and Sof. Now he's going to something he didn't say till now. That's higher than the 10 hidden spheres. Understand? So now this has a whole different take on the whole thing. What's going on here is, see, till now, this was what the real punchline of the parentheses is. Till now, we were talking how the esospheres agnuzas are. How could they coexist? So the answer is it's in an amorphous, abstract state, as he gave all the different examples. And therefore, they can reside one near each other. But there was never a discussion of them replacing each other, the keiches. So in the parentheses, you began a whole discussion. This is much more than just. And then he went back and forth. Maybe it's not much more. But then he went back, it is much more. Because also on the essence, something happened. And even this explanation that he gave now, that it's only figuratively, so to speak, that it's only, but that he still says that's only one explanation. That's not the only explanation. So something did happen on the essence of the soul. So now he's saying, yes, it is a new thing. We're not talking about, before Esospheres and Gluses doesn't have the power to reverse. You have the power to reside one near one another, each other. Where Eish and Mayim, as they extend themselves, cannot. They fight each other. They coexist. Atzmus, however, which is higher than even the spheres altogether, that gives the power that Shemiya becomes like Riyah and Riyah like Shemiya. So he has a lot of explanations in Rei and Asanishme here, but the bottom line is, he's still going back that there is a fundamental thing that happens in the etzim of the soul. It's not only in the extension. It's not just the explanation he gave, that Rei and Asanishme, that you sense the Ruchnius and that's close to you. But even Shemiya has a deeper experience of a Sagas Mus. How is that possible? Let's put it this way, the faculties in the soul don't have the power to reverse roles. They have the power to coexist. So this is high, this actually is like planting the seed of real Ardas that will come later. And Atzmus has the power So this comes from Atzmus that's higher than Nessus.
Talk about coming later, chapter 200.
Yeah, but even later, if you remember, there's I have to look. Yeshlem Shizeli and Taltchia. Yeshlem is, you could say this is Taltchia. This is the dew that gives life. There's the Gemara says about Taltchia that when the Asalave will be like a tal, dew will fall, and that will it'll be a moisture, that will revive Taltchia. Because Taltchia, the Gemara also says when on each dibur parcha nishmasam. Every time, every one of the 10 Commandments, their souls expired, and through Taltchia, it had to be resurrected, basically. So that's Taltchia. It's coming from a higher place. In other words, something happened by Mattan Torah. What he wants to say, Mattan Torah did not just happen a revelation of Ostensibly, something new. And that is what caused them to be Iskalus. Now he's saying Iskalus, not Fisardus or Isardus. Scholars that they actually can replace each other's role, interconnectivity. Shmiya can play the role of Riyah, Riyah can play the role of Shmiya. That's the real Chiddush of the parentheses, and it is relevant. That's what this whole thing is. Let me finish the chapter here. This is out of the parentheses. So Yesh Lema the Knesriya Shmiya the Neshama Kedim Stopshus Beguv. You could say that the level of Riyah and Shmiya the Neshama, that the level of sight and sound in the soul before it manifests in the body, Shubchin Sriya Samahuz Vasoga Samahuz. Is the level, which is the level of Riyah Samahus, to see the essence, Vasaga Samahus, to comprehend the essence, Kumayasagas and Neshamas Began Eden, like the comprehension of souls in Gan Eden. In other words, in the Etzim, in the soul, this is the roles of sight and sound, because sight and sound and physically we know what their role is. The question is, what's the role in the soul? So it's basically one sees the Mahus and one comprehends the Mahus. So he says, all this, this is only in the energy level of the structure. Which means in the divine reflection of the divine light that manifests in the world.
Right.
And the parentheses, in Atzilus, we could say this is only in the reflection of the energies of Atzilus, not the essence of the energy. Being that they have left and separated from the containers. Riyah and Shmiya. But the essence of the energy in Atzilus, that is. And in generally, the Ein Sof that's higher than manifesting in the worlds, is only we only can have a comprehend. We only can know of it. The inyan reis anishma hudiyas muhus atzmeir. And what happened was when they saw the sound, they actually saw the essence of the energy, not just the way it manifests in the worlds. V'shem nesanira, and hearing the sight, shasogi b'chinas hasoga samuhus. Obviously, this can only be understood after the parentheses.
Right. He did take on that.
Yeah. V'shem nesanira shasogi b'chinas hasoga samuhus. Well, it's combining them all. That hasoga, comprehension is in the comprehension, the essence. The inyan hayisarvus. Now, what is the combination? Hushakol keach eina mugde b'muhused. Every faculty is not limited in its personality. Dafka specifically to its personality. This is like the discussion earlier of the exchange, of the reversal of roles, substitution of roles. In this bar there that we discussed earlier, that's because the source is amorphous, is formless. And this is more than the sartus. Yeah, because the sartus means they coexist. They can reside side by side. Here, they actually can replace each other's roles. He's combining all the meanings together.
Yeah, accepting the figurative.
So let me just do the kitzur here.
He's accepting the reyness and from his figurative.
Both. Yeah, no, it's b'mokamach. Look, it's different explanations, but they're all fit in here. Kitzur, the explanation of this is the 10 hidden spheres are in a form of combination and unity. Even though they're fundamentally opposites. In the essential state that is not revealed, you cannot recognize their oppositeness, their contradictions.
Opposition.
Yeah, because they're not yet in the form of mitzias. They're not yet substantial. And that's where they get united. They're united as one. Like abstract ideas. like the root of seichel in its nebulous form, like the essential faculties as they are encompassed in the essence of the soul. This is what by Mattan Torah they saw the sound. The sight, they actually saw the spirit, which they usually cannot see and only hear from a distance. And they heard the sight, which means they actually appreciated the muhus, the essence of the experience. This is a little review in the combination of how all these different meanings in the Nishma works. But clearly from the summary, you see that's how he concludes it. So bottom line is, is one level, that way they all reside side by side because they're in that amorphous state. Okay, we'll stop here. We finished chapter 19, page 32. We learned today 31 and 32 in Ayin Beis.